Hi guys, today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in May. If you've already watched my June TBR, you might be aware that May was a bit of a weird month for me, brain space wise. I feel like I just did not have the energy to read as much as I had hoped to, so while my TBR was ambitious, I still think I was able to get to quite a bit, all things considered, but definitely did not complete everything that was on my TBR, unfortunately. Which, it happens. I'm not going to punish myself for the stuff that I didn't read, but I'm going to celebrate myself for the stuff that I did read. I had a couple bangers, but overall this month was actually kind of average. I don't know if maybe that was because of the weird brain space that I was in. I don't know, kind of mixed feelings about what I read this month, unfortunately. So first up, we have a book that I actually read mostly in April, but I filmed my last wrap-up before I finished it, and that is Redemptor by Jordan Fueko. This is the second book in the Raybearer duology, and unfortunately I just didn't like this one quite as much as the first one. I don't know what it is about duologies lately. They're kind of fizzling out for me. Like, the first one starts off really strong, really cool ideas, really cool characters, but then the second one just feels like underdeveloped or even kind of unnecessary. And I don't know where exactly I land on with this one. It just wasn't overall as memorable as the first one for me. We continue to follow Cersei in this story as she's developing and kind of coming more into her own. She kind of has a quest for this book that she needs to fulfill, and I thought that was like gonna be the majority of this novel, but like that bit doesn't take place until like almost the end, and like the entire book I was like, when is she gonna do this thing? Like, I don't know. The pacing was weird to me. The breakup of the story itself was weird. Some things felt like really repetitive, like she was going through something that just kind of kept coming up and coming up and coming up, which, obviously that's realistic, but narratively it's just kind of boring. And then there was like a twist thing that I saw coming from a mile away, which was a little unfortunate, but I don't know. I try not to hold that against a story because it means that there were a lot of breadcrumbs left. I feel like very meh on this one, unfortunately. And it's a bummer because I loved the first one so much. I thought this world was so cool. I loved the idea of Cersei sort of being bound to fulfill something that she didn't want to do, and the relationship she has with the prince and her fellow council members is really interesting. I do think this continues to suffer from the fact that there are just way too many council members than can be explored in this series. She's got like 12 people that she has this very intimate connection with, but due to the constraints of it being, a 400-page novel, or even two 400-page novels, you really only get insight into what her relationships look like with like 2 or 3 of them. In any case, I gave this 3 stars. I would still definitely recommend this duology. I still think it stands really well on its own, the first one, and that the ideas are super strong and unique. This one just felt a little lacking focus, I think, for me. Then I picked up my favorite book that I read this month, and that was Belladonna by Adeline Grace. This book slapped. I don't know. I was so invested. The audiobook, in case you're curious, is phenomenal. I loved the narrator, and like the way she does certain characters' voices is just like, ooh, I loved it. So this book follows 19-year-old Signa Farrow, so it reads a little bit more almost into that new adult category. And when she was a baby, her entire family died, and Death came to collect them all. And when he went to collect Signa's soul, he couldn't. And for some reason, Signa seems immune to death. And he's been intrigued by her ever since. And she's also been kind of passed around from extended family member to extended family member because she has this big fortune that's connected to her, but she can't claim until I think she's 20. They all kind of die around her, and she feels cursed by death and doesn't know what's happening. So she decides to confront Death about all this and be like, dude, let me live my life. I just want some stability. She ends up kind of in a distant cousin's household, and while she's there, she discovers one of the cousins is deathly ill and that their mother just passed away from the same disease. And so Signa's trying to figure out what the heck is going on and see if she can stop death. This was like the gothic romance murder mystery of my dreams. I loved the characters so much. The relationship between Signa and Death was so cool. I loved all of their interactions. I love how Death was depicted in this book. It was probably one of my favorite depictions of Death, like personified, that I've read in a very long time. And I just thought it was so interesting. And like, I can't talk too much about it because spoilers, but oh my gosh, it was so good. Signa's powers were also really interesting, and I loved seeing her kind of explore that and come into her own a little bit better. The murder mystery left me guessing. I thought I knew for sure what was going on, and then it wasn't that. It was so good. The next book comes out, I believe, in the fall, and I am so excited. That's one of my most anticipated reads for the rest of the year now, because I loved this book so much. This is the Fairy Loot edition that I got, I believe, last year, and I've been trying to get through Fairy Loot books a little bit better, and so that's kind of why I picked this one up. It was like, this is a backlist Fairy Loot book I haven't gotten to, let me just read it, and I was not expecting to be as obsessed with it as I was, but it occupied my brain for like the entire 2 or 3 days that it took me to read this. It was just like one of the only things I could think about, and I loved it. And again, the audiobook, if that's your jam, is so good, so highly recommend that, and I gave it 5 stars. And I picked up Artificial Condition by Martha Wells. This is the sequel to All Systems Red, part of the Murderbot Diary series by her, and this was a lot of fun. I did think the first one was a little bit stronger, but I think in long series like this, where you're getting the introduction to everybody, like, that makes sense. This one we follow Murderbot as they're exploring kind of something that happened to them in the past that they feel really guilty about, and they're trying to decide, or like figure out why it happened. And along the way, they end up teaming up with some hapless humans and sort of begrudgingly helping them with their own thing, and that's always a really fun dynamic. I love that Murderbot can't help but to help people, and they claim to be ambivalent and not like humans, but they find themselves wrapped up in a lot of human drama. So this was really fun. I picked up the audiobook for this one, and it wasn't my favorite. I felt a little disconnected at times, but the reading experience was still quite good. There was also the introduction of Art. I don't remember what it stands for. It's something really snarky, but they're like a ship that helps Murderbot, and the dynamic between Murderbot and Art is amazing. There's one passage in this that just, like, I was crying laughing that had to do with them watching TV together, and it was fabulous. So I give this one 4 stars, like a less strong 4 stars than All Systems Red, but I'm still really into the series, and I can't wait to see where it goes. Then I had an arc of In the Lives of Puppets that I got through, and then I also later got this Fairy Loot edition, which, side note, is not my favorite. I think TJ Klune has such cool covers, and the fact that they completely redesigned this one left me kind of gutted, actually. And I think this weirdly resembles the first binding, like just the colors and the composition and everything, and even the font. So I don't know. I got it after I read it, and I really don't know how I feel about like how it suits the vibe of the story. Like, it's definitely, I prefer the original cover, basically. But I digress. This book is kind of a Pinocchio-inspired story. We follow a boy who was raised by robots. While he's exploring the junk piles, kind of by his home, he finds an android that has a dark past, and it sort of sets them off on this journey where they have to go rescue a family member, and it's kind of a reverse Pinocchio, because he's like surrounded by robots and he's the only real boy. But yeah, I don't know, I just never felt super connected with this story, unfortunately. Of the 3 TJ Klune books I've read now, this is definitely my least favorite. I loved the robots that like he hangs out with, Nurse Ratched and Rambo, who is a Roomba, and I thought they were very charming, and they were definitely the highlight of the book for me, but like the relationship between Victor, our human boy, and Hap, the android that he saves, just didn't really do much for me. I don't know why. I was really excited about this one, and I thought it was a really cool idea, but I also think at certain points it just felt too much like Pinocchio, and I mean, that's gonna be, like, whether that works for you or not is completely subjective. Pinocchio's not my favorite fairy tale, so I was kind of hoping it would be a little less directly connected, but again, how a reader is going to receive that is not going to be like, you know, black and white. So I ended up giving this 3 stars, and no one is more disappointed about that than I am. Then I finally picked up a Trisha Levenseller book, Warrior of the Wild. Something about this cover just gave me spring vibes, and where it's finally getting warmer in New England, I was like, this is it, it's time. In this one we follow, she's 18 years old, Rasmira, and during her sort of coming of age ceremony, she fails due to sabotage, and she's banished into the wilds. This is very like Norse inspired. She's pretty capable out in the wild, but she's also given this like impossible task to regain her honor. And I thought there was a really interesting twist kind of with the magic system that I wish I could talk about, but it would be a huge spoiler, so I can't. But I thought that was really creative, and that I think was actually my favorite part about this. Rasmira was okay as a protagonist. She didn't really do like a whole lot for me, and so therefore I didn't really like super buy into the romance that she had going on. But overall, this was pretty cute. I thought it worked really well as a standalone, and I'm definitely intrigued to pick up more by Trisha Levenseller. Ultimately, this didn't blow my mind, but it was a fun and fast YA fantasy story, so I gave it 3 stars. Then I picked up an arc for Same Time Next Summer by Annabelle Monaghan, and this one reminded me a lot of Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. We have this East Coast vacation house thing. I think it's on Long Island. The main character's family goes there every summer while she's growing up, and while she's there, she ends up developing a relationship with her neighbor, and they become very close as teenagers, but then something horrible happened, and they haven't seen each other in like 10 years. And in her first trip back to the beach house with her now fiance, she crosses paths again with the boy that she used to love, and drama ensues. There's a lot of bouncing back and forth between like the current timeline and the past timeline, much like Love in Other Words. But for some reason, like the way it was broken up with this one just was didn't work for me. I wanted a little bit more development of like from when they were kids and like why they fell in love with each other. But yeah, ultimately this one just felt like a little flat for me. Like, it was fun. It was a good beach read. It's a good summer read. I'm not gonna, like, not recommend this book, but I did like this author's other book, Nora Goes Off Script, much better. I don't know if it's just because this reminded me so much of Love in Other Words, which is a book I gave 5 stars, absolutely, like, emotionally broke me, that this one just felt, like, kind of underwhelming in comparison, or what? But, like, it was fine. It was fun, but it just didn't, like, touch me and rip my heart out like I wanted it to. But again, that might make it a better summer beach read because you won't be crying in public. So there's that. Gave it 3 stars. It was fine. Would recommend if you want something kind of light and fluffy and romantic. Then I picked up Cersei by Madeline Miller. This has been on my TBR forever, and dear Lord, this took me forever to read. The prose in Madeline Miller fashion was really pretty and very poetic, but still digestible. But like for some reason, the story just dragged for this one. I loved Song of Achilles, and I thought that one did a great job of like taking a story that I know and like expanding on it in such a beautiful and touching way, and like tragic way, obviously. I feel like it really enhanced that relationship for me and like that story, and gave me a much like more intimate view into that relationship, whereas like Cersei just sort of felt like a summary of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Like she hears about a lot of like these really big Greek myths that you probably have heard about, but like she hears a lot of it secondhand. And I'm just like, why? What did this add to the story? There's like so many things that she hears from like Apollo or Odysseus about their journeys or like other happenings in ancient Greece that just have nothing to do with Cersei. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, I don't know. I felt really conflicted about this. I was really looking forward to it because I enjoyed Song of Achilles so much, but the pacing was super boring for me. It was just so slow. Obviously, like, Cersei is sequestered and exiled to this island, and she has a lot of time to herself to like contemplate life and like meaning and all that. So maybe the pacing sort of matches that reflection that she has to do, but I just never felt invested in like a single moment of this. A lot of it just felt so familiar. It was like a rehash of Mythology 101, and I just don't know if like at the end of it anything that Madeline Miller added really like made the story feel more full for me. So yeah, I don't know. I feel very conflicted about this one. I didn't think it was a bad book, but I think maybe I'm just a little too familiar with mythology for this to have been interesting for me, so I gave it 3 stars. And the final novel I read this month was Mortal Follies by Alexis Hall. This is a sapphic fantasy Regency romance, which checks a lot of boxes for me. I love fantasy Regency romance, and I was really curious to see, like, the sort of sapphic side of what that could look like, because you have all these societal conventions that, you know, that's very taboo and risque, and I just thought that was such an interesting setup going in. I've also never read anything by Alexis Hall before. I know they have some very popular romance novels out. I just haven't gotten to any of them, and where this one had that fantasy lean to it, like, that's definitely what attracted me to pick up this one first. It's I have mixed feelings about this one too. Like I said, a lot of the books this month just like had some issues for me. This one in particular, I think, mainly fell to the narrative structure. We have a fae, like, I think they're technically referred to as a hobgoblin creature that is observing all the action. Their name is Robin, and they decided at this time that they, like, thought something interesting was going to happen with this character, and they decided to follow them and see how that all unraveled, and they're collecting this story. Unfortunately, Robin just felt so present as the narrator that I just did not connect with the 2 leads of this book at all. This relationship that's developing between this very sort of stereotypical young noblewoman and this other character who's referred to as a duke, even though like she's not actually the duke. It's just like her dad was the duke and then he died, and all of her brothers mysteriously died, and she's kind of like on the outskirts of society. Like the actions that bring them together, I was just kind of like, why does either character care about the other one? Like, they had nothing to do with each other. I don't know, I just felt so distant from the action because of the way Robin was telling the story that I was not invested in the romance, like, whatsoever. The pacing was also really odd to me in this one. So part of the main crux of this book is that our main character is cursed, and in one of her outings, she's wearing this dress that starts to like disintegrate, and so she has to hide to avoid scandal. And pretty much at every other social outing she goes to, something horrible is happening to her, and it's like obvious that there's some sort of outer influence that is targeting her. And so like the resolution of the curse comes in at like the 55% mark, and like I didn't know what I was supposed to be expecting for the next 45%. I was like, that's the story. Like, it's, I don't know. I didn't love that. So that was this huge bummer. I was really looking forward to this book. I, like I said, love fantasy romance and like in a historical setting just in general. And I thought that this one sounded super cool, and I just think the execution was not for me. I'm undecided as to whether or not I want to pick up any more by Alexis Hall. This seems very different from what they've done in the past, so I could probably be persuaded. But yeah, this one just didn't do it for me, and I was so excited when I requested this arc. I was like, this sounds incredible. So another disappointing read this month. So as I've said, my brain was kind of all over the place. I was able to read a few more novels than I would have expected, and a couple arcs, which always feels good to get off my plate. But for the most part, the only thing I was able to handle was manga, especially in like the latter half of the month. So I started reading Yona of the Dawn last month and absolutely fell in love with this world and the characters and just everything about it. I binged the anime with my boyfriend, and tragically that one only goes through like volume 8, and there's no second season, and I will never get over that. But I started picking up more of the mangas this month, and I read volumes 3 through 23, which clearly I don't have all of them because they're like $10 a pop. I've been borrowing them from the library digitally, so that's been a nice alternative. But yeah, there were certain parts of the month where the brain rot was so real I could only read Yona of the Dawn. 20 volumes of this month, you guys. And I still have like 20 volumes left to go. It's great. I love this series so much. We follow a 16-year-old princess named Yona, and on her birthday, her father is tragically murdered, and she has to flee the castle or die herself. And her bodyguard, Hawk, is there to protect her and, you know, keep her alive in this political turmoil and out in the wilderness. And the slow burn between them is absolutely phenomenal. It is perfection. It is the princess bodyguard trope of my dreams. And I just think they're absolutely perfect. There's a lot more to the story than that. Yona has to find these 4 people known as the Dragon Warriors, and they're all so unique and funny and charming and absolutely lovable. And this little like band of supporters that she gathers around herself, they're like a little family, and again, it's just so charming and cute. The story also tackles a lot of political issues. As a princess, Yona was very naive to the suffering that her people had to deal with, and now that she's kind of out and about in the world, she sees a lot of injustice that she wants to be able to fix. So following her and the group dealing with that is so fascinating, and I just love how this story is going. So I know I've been talking about this for several minutes now, but I absolutely love this series. It's definitely a new favorite, and I can't wait to continue reading it. And, you know, hence the reading 20 volumes in 1 month. It's fabulous. I can't recommend it enough. So yeah, that wraps up my very strange reading month for May. Lots of meh, but a couple hits, so especially with Yona of the Dawn. Please let me know down below if you've read any of these. I'd love to talk about them with you. Even if I have an opinion that's different from yours, I'm very open to talking that out. I'm always curious to see other people's opinions about books that I've read. So thank you guys so much for watching. Also, feel free to check the links down in my description box below, like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, have a lovely day. Bye.